Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our second webinar in our Women in Leadership series. My name is Stephanie Howard. I am a lecturer of marketing at the Stetson Hatcher School of Business at Mercer University, as well as director of the Mercer Innovation Center. I'm extremely excited today. We have an amazing workshop today and two leaders in this arena. We're going to hear from Dr. Morgan Riechel and Ph.D. candidate Jordon Beasley. They're both going to lead us through a workshop about mindful decision-making for effective leadership. It's so critical in times like today and moving forward that we take a moment and be thoughtful, plan, and they're going to give us some tips and tools to help us navigate what it's like to be a mindful leader. So Dr. Riechel, we'll have you start us off first. Oh, also, as you are listening to their presentation, you can ask questions throughout. The bottom of your screen, you will see a little button that says Q&A. Feel free to type your questions in the Q&A, and we will answer them throughout the presentation. All right, Dr. Riechel, you're up.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Morgan Riechel, and I'm a professor in the counseling department at Mercer University. I have a Ph.D. in counselor education and have worked as a school counselor, a marriage and family therapist, and I'm also a licensed professional counselor. And with me, I have one of our Ph.D. students, Jordon Beasley, who just completed her comprehensive exams. So congratulations, Jordon, and she's well on her way to earning her Ph.D. in counselor education just as soon as she finishes this little paper that she has to write, which is the dissertation. Jordon is also a school counselor like me, and she works as a lecturer at the University of North Georgia. So our presentation today is on decision-making. Decision-making models, especially for professional ethical decision-making, is one of my areas of research. We have, as Americans, have had to make a lot of really difficult decisions over the past few months, really hard decisions that have no really clear course of action. The world is really confusing right now in a lot of ways, not just in our professional lives, but in our families, in our communities. So Jordon and I are going to talk about how humans make decisions, and then we're going to provide you with some cognitive tools for decision making that we've been using with our master's level students who are just learning to be professionals, but these are tools that are applicable to just about everyone. Okay, so let's start with what we know to be certain. What information do we trust that we use to make our decisions? Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." Which means the source of knowing is with our minds, that I can only be certain about the facts that I can think. And this idea has been foundational for much of Western philosophy since, but it privileges the mind and separates it from the experience of the rest of the body. Some argue that, in fact, more recent research in neuroscience seems to confirm that thinking, decision-making, and judgment are all multisensory, and that it's an interconnected process that includes not just the mind or the brain, but also the body, and that these multiple embodied ways of knowing should not be immediately doubted or discounted, but taken as a whole. And this is not a new idea, though current neuroscience research seems to indicate this. We go back to Aristotle, who believed that, even back to Aristotle, he's believed that knowledge was dual and was experienced in the form of sensations and abstractions. The source of our knowing is not just what the knowledge that we perceive using the senses, but also the abstraction and how the mind categorizes information. Aristotle believed that we must experience a concept through the senses before we can truly gain knowledge. And it's how we move from more concrete ideas to the abstract. And it's often a developmental process that we can't skip over. One example that I think about is I have a 2-year-old son, and how he learns to count. And when he's counting, he takes this abstraction of a number, but he represents it in his physical body through his fingers. He counts on his fingers. And we're just starting to talk about adding and subtracting with him. And if I say, now Lucian, if I have 2 cookies, and I want to add 1 cookie to it, how many cookies do I have total? And each finger represents a number for him, and he'll count, well, 1, 2, and 3. And that abstract number is embodied in these numbers. And if he didn't have the fingers, then he would have a hard time understanding that concept. That's a 2-year-old, but even we as adults move from concrete ideas to more abstract ideas through a bodily representation as well. So sounds like a good system. Our bodies teach us about the physical world through our senses, and then we use concrete physical model to understand more complex abstract concepts that are translated or categorized in our mind. So why is decision making as a leader so difficult? As a leader at your job or in your family or community, think about some decisions that you make on a typical day. How many decisions are you making? A lot of us are making many decisions, some that are easy and don't require much effort, but there are some decisions that are really, really difficult. What are some really difficult decisions that you've had to make recently in your life? And what about that decision made it particularly difficult? Hold that decision in your mind, and we'll come back to it in a minute. But I want to talk about some research by Daniel Kahneman, who is a psychologist and a behavioral economist. He developed a way of explaining how we have two systems, as he calls it, and how they work in tandem. System one is our intuitive default mode of thinking that is rooted in our physical experience. It is the primary method because it offloads our brain from more complex tasks. This is what we may call our gut instinct. And as we're talking about it, we even use our bodies to talk about our gut. We feel these ideas in our gut. We use this expression to refer to our physical bodies, or in the counseling world, we also call it a clinical hunch or an intuition. This way of knowing is rooted in our previous experience, and we connect these cognitions with our emotions and our bodily reactions. We may say something like, I just saw something that made me feel sick to my stomach. So that emotion helps us understand what we're seeing and putting words to things that maybe we can't otherwise articulate. We know that something is not right. We can feel it in our bodies, feel it in our stomach, and it can be a barometer for us to know what is right, even if our brain is not able to fully articulate what is wrong. Our bodies still feel it. System one, on the other hand, is much more labor intensive. This is the analytical reasoning system of our brain that kicks in only if we tell it to. It is slow and lazy, and we have to intentionally make it override our system one. If we went around operating in system two, our brains would be completely exhausted, quite literally. This type of thinking uses many more calories, and it's taxing. System two is open to receiving and analyzing new information, whereas system one relies more on broad categories, cognitive shortcuts, heuristics, which is just general rules of thumb. It's also where we hold our stereotypes and our biases. Our system one allows our brains to fill in the gaps when we are given only limited information, which is often the case in decision making. If we had access to all of the relevant information at the very time that we needed it, we would be much easier to make difficult decisions. But that's seldom the case in real life. So our brain compensates to fill in the missing information. And our brains truly are quite amazing. Often we get it right, trying to fill in the gaps, but not always. So let's take a look at this. For example, it doesn't matter what order the letters in a word appear. The only important thing is that the first and the last letter are in the right place. How does our brain read that? If we were to truly read the letters, it wouldn't make any sense at all. But somehow our brains are able to compensate and make sense of it. Makes me ask the question, are we ever really reading? Or are we really just looking for familiar patterns, things that we recognize? Oh, I think I understand that word, and then moving on from there. Our brains look for the easy answer first, which saves computing space for more complex tasks.
Dr. Riechel, we had a few more people join us. I just want to reiterate to them, if you have questions throughout the presentation, please just type them in the Q&A section.
Great, thank you. So our brains look for the easy answer first, saving computing space for more complex tasks. Our biases, assumptions, mental shortcuts that we have are adaptive in everyday life, but they're ultimately less accurate judgments than our system two critical analysis. So I'm a teacher. You guys know I'm a teacher. I like a really good scenario. So let's take a look at this one, the story of Linda. Linda is 31 years old. She's single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and she also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Which is more probable? Number one, that Linda is a bank teller, or number two, that Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement? We'll give you a minute to think about that. So this question is a question of probability, statistical probability. So I'm asking you to kick in or kickstart your system 2. The correct answer is the first option. It is more likely that she is a bank teller rather than a bank teller and active in the feminist movement. It's more likely that A rather than A plus B. So if you said the second option was more probable, that she's a bank teller and active in the feminist movement, then you're in really good company because the majority of adults actually endorse the second option. What's happening is that you're letting your system 1 fill in the gaps for you based upon the information that was given. She's perhaps likely to have participated in the feminist movement based upon her interests. So you made inferences based upon Linda's interest, which influenced your decision. They may or may not have been correct about her, but were not more statistically probable. So dual process reasoning. We know then that system 1 is subject to bias, which causes us to fall back on our stereotypes. This happens automatically without us being aware of it, whether we want it to or not. Powerful emotions that are embedded in our system 1 can override what we know intellectually in our system 2. On the other hand, we can talk ourselves out of what we know we feel to be right in our bodies. We want to mitigate cognitive biases, and when information is embedded in our system 1 thinking, we are unable to examine it critically. Both of these systems are important to our decision making. So how can we use both of these decision making systems in a way that helps improve our decision making? As another example from my 2.5-year-old son, over the weekend, he and I were in my office, and he climbed up into my office chair and sat at my desk and said, "Mommy, I'm going to do some work now." It's like, okay. So he gets out my calculator and he got out a sheet of paper and a pencil, and he starts writing, certainly how he's seen me do over the past few months that I've been working at home. And he said, "Shh, now everyone be quiet. I need to do some work. I need to concentrate." Okay, so he's sitting there writing, and after a few minutes I said, "All right, Lucian, what is your conclusion after all of this work that you've been doing?" And he looked up and he goes, "I think we're gonna need more trucks, more dump trucks. We're gonna definitely need more dump trucks." So from a 2.5-year-old, the result of his analysis and conclusion is we need more dump trucks. Turns out, if you know him, he loves dump trucks. So it's not surprising that he would say, we need to have more dump trucks. But, as time to model good decision-making for him, I said, Lucian, I recognize you looked at the data, you took a lot of time to examine it, to look at alternatives. And so I'm really proud of you for coming to this determination. He's 2.5 years old, we're adults, but a lot of times, our decisions are a result of this lens that we have, the things that are embedded in our system 1. And so it's not surprising that somebody who loves dump trucks would say, we need more dump trucks. And so we want to consider how, as adults, are we letting those things also influence our decision making. So there's a difference between having a value and making it one's own. The process whereby values become our own depend largely on the extent to which they acquire emotion. If you want to understand what someone values, you want to examine what makes him or her emotional. That is the lens that we use in our decision making. So understanding these emotions can help us make more sense of our decision making. One thing that tends to cloud our decision making, so we do want to understand both our system 1 and system 2. But one thing that does complicate our ability to make good decisions and our body's response is our body's response to high levels of often chronic stress, which would be anxiety. Anxiety is a maladaptive emotion that can be the biggest barrier to effective decision making. It can cloud our judgment. It makes us turn inside. It makes us identify threats and fall subject to bias. It makes us make unethical decisions that are in our own self-interest. So when we recognize that we are feeling anxious, we want to go back to the basics of what we know, which is our physical bodies. We want to focus on our breathing. We want to focus on our heartbeats. We want to focus on relaxing our muscles, understanding where we're feeling the anxiety. Is it in our heads? Is it in our neck and back? Our physical bodies can ground us in the present moment and help us to filter out the noise that distracts. It is our physical representation of what we know to be true. So we want to examine, become mindful of our automatic processes. We want to think back to those times that we have had to make really difficult decisions and examine that automatic response. Now, think back to that particular one that we had you consider earlier. How did your body react? Not just how did your mind, but how did your whole body process it? Where did you feel the tension in your body? Now set aside all that you know, all of the history that you have with that particular experience that informs your emotion about the situation. Imagine encountering this issue for the very first time, involving people that you don't have any knowledge of. Would you have come to a different conclusion? Now, of course, we're never completely separate from the decisions that we have to make. So this is really just an exercise in looking at alternatives to understand alternative perspectives. When Jordan and I are teaching counseling classes, we talk about slowing down the process of decision making and becoming more aware of the process itself and the shortcuts that our brains are making on our behalf, but perhaps at the detriment of our decision making outcomes. We want to become more open to outliers, more sensitive to context, and to have more cognitive tools in our toolbox. And turns out that mindfulness is one way that we have found to do that. So I'm going to turn it over to Jordan now to talk about some of the work that she and I have been doing in our counseling classes using mindfulness to help enhance decision-making.
Okay, so this is a beautiful definition for mindfulness. There are so many out there, but this author, Kabat-Zinn, says, mindfulness is paying attention in a curious, deliberate, kind, and non-judgmental way to life as it unfolds each moment. I don't know about you, but for me, that is a beautiful definition, but it's also kind of high level. So like, what does that actually mean? And so our next slide, we'll go into mindfulness in lay terms. What does mindfulness mean to us, me and you? And so first of all, it's a here and now presence. So being in the here and now is to be in the present. We spend so much of our time, especially when we're at work, thinking about the past or thinking about the future. Very seldom do we put all of that aside and pay attention to the right now. Being in the here and now requires us to slow down. When we're at work, that almost seems counterintuitive because it's about productivity, it's about the next thing, and it's about accomplishing. But to be in the present means that we're going to slow down. We're going to give ourselves permission to stop going at 150% and just be in the moment, even if it's just for a few minutes. So along with the here and now is emotional self-awareness. So, Morgan mentioned throughout having these physical sensations in your body. Well, those physical sensations are messages to you. It's your body sending you a message. And so if you're feeling tense in your shoulders, the emotional response that may go with that is acknowledging that you feel stressed. If someone says something, if someone makes a comment, and you're like, what? Maybe acknowledging the fact that you feel angry. So our body is going to send us like that gut feeling or tension or maybe nervousness, sweating. And we have to be in tune with what our physical body is saying about our emotional state. One step farther from just the self-awareness is accepting our thoughts and feelings. So it's one thing to say, yes, I feel angry. It's another thing to say, I feel angry and it's okay. As a counselor, I tell everybody, you should feel your feelings. It's really important that if you had an idea and someone shot down your idea and you feel bummed about it, it's normal to feel sad. Normalize that other people would feel sad. It's okay that I feel sad. So it's giving yourself that time to feel that feeling and then move on. We can't ruminate in it. because but we also can't sweep it under the rug. So the next two, freshness of perspective and seeing the world as it is, as if we're seeing it for the first time. So those take practice, but that is allowing ourselves to step back and look at things completely differently, almost as if you're looking at it through the lens of a child. So we get so wrapped up in our typical way of being, our normal way of operating, that we automatically go into this autopilot. Being mindful is you intentionally taking a step back from your autopilot. And finally, mindfulness is both a practice and it's a disposition. So it's not just something that you do, but mindfulness becomes something that you are.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
And it's for one of you. How long is too long, or is there an amount of time we should be dwelling in these emotions? Let's say I go to a meeting, my presentation doesn't go well, I'm really upset about it. How long can I have a pity party about it? Or how long is too long to dwell on the negative emotion?
So I think that definitely depends on the severity of the event, right? If somebody shot down your idea and you're upset about it, thinking about that for a couple weeks is not healthy. But if you were to go through a tragedy or lose a family member, absolutely take the time that you need to grieve, right? So how long you should have your pity party or your grief session or the feeling of your feelings definitely depends on the severity of the event. And I like to use that rule of thumb. Am I going to remember this 5 minutes from now, 5 days from now, 5 weeks from now, 5 years from now? And that can kind of help you judge how long is a healthy time for you to have that pity party. But have it. If you feel sad, have your pity party, even if it's just for 5 minutes. It's okay.
Jordon,
Yeah.
can I add something?
Helpful, Stephanie?
Yeah, I eat my emotions, so I would just eat a bunch of cookies and be fine.
Can I also add something too? I think the power of mindfulness is that it allows us to separate these emotions from ourselves. So when we are embedded in emotions, it becomes not so much this happened to me, it's that I feel like I'm less than. And mindfulness says, no, it's not so much about, it's about understanding the emotions, but the way that we do that is by separating it out from ourselves, and to recognize that things can happen, but it doesn't fundamentally change who I am or what I know about myself. And that can be a very liberating feeling, such that I can hold that negative emotion as long as I need to, but it doesn't hurt me in the same sense as when I am embedded in it. And that language of being embedded versus being subject to something versus letting it be object that's separate from yourself is an idea from mindfulness.
Yes. Yes, acknowledging it and then letting it pass is that central tenet in mindfulness. Not that we ignore it, because that's not mindful, right? That's sweeping it under the rug and moving on. Okay, so when we are mindful, and I mean this in terms of a disposition, we are able to view a situation from several perspectives. So our goal for mindfulness, mindful practice, or mindful disposition is to become better leaders, to become role models, to become better decision makers. And to be those things, we have to be able to view a situation from several different perspectives. So, and the way that we do that is through practicing it, through living it, and through modeling it. So when we are faced with a situation, we might look at it from the emotional lens. We might then need our system 2 to kick in and look at it through a logical lens, a rational lens. We might look at it through a lens of empathy or compassion. We might look at it through the lens of another person. How does that person perceive this event or situation? We have to diversify our perspective. And mindfulness is one way that we're able to do And then we also see the information presented as novel. So that means we're getting out of autopilot. So often we just say, I've dealt with this 100 times. I know exactly what to do. And you just do it because you've done it before and this is what you always do. But to be mindful is to not do what you always do. To be mindful is to think about other ways that it could be done. The way that you've always done it is not necessarily the best way or the only way. We also need to attend to the context that we're perceiving the information. And what I mean by that is we have to consider the context specific. Sorry guys, my light is
Timer.
and there's no way that I can turn it actually on. So I apologize that I'm in the dark. But we have to attend to the who, the specific what, the specific when. We have to attend to those contextual factors to make our decisions. But we also need to use all of the available data. So say you're sitting in a meeting and Sam sitting across from you says, I'm fine. But Sam has his arms crossed and he has this mean mug on. Well, Sam, I hear you saying that you're fine, but you don't look fine. So when we make a decision, we need to consider what those verbal things are, but then what are also these nonverbals? What are these contextual factors that are also data? And then finally, we create new categories through which information can be understood. So that means we're doing these three things to come up with new ways of processing information, expanding the way that we think, finding new ways of being, and then finding new ways to conceptualize and add to our own narrative of the situation.
We have a question.
Sure.
So the question is, leaders are held accountable for dealing with a high level of ambiguity. Would you agree that we are also responsible for eliminating ambiguity for ourselves and teams so that each time we begin with more factual information?
That's a great question.
Yeah, so the question was, are we responsible for eliminating ambiguity? So coming to clear decisions in the context of a lot of ambiguity. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and so that's one thing that makes decision-making challenging, is that we are faced with a lot of ambiguity and not clear decisions. But we're in a role where we're leading, absolutely. We need to be able to clarify and give our teammates actionable directives. So yes, yeah, absolutely agree with that statement.
And another question.
Oh, sorry. Can I just add to that really quick? I also don't think it's your responsibility as a business leader to create a false sense of security. So we're not just going to get rid of ambiguity because that's what we should do, but it's our job to get rid of ambiguity to the extent that we are able while being authentic, right? Because in leadership, it's so important to have that trust. And if you're providing false information or not being true to who you are, then that damages the trust for you as a leader.
Another question they ask, it's difficult to look at nonverbal clues in Zoom meetings. Any suggestions of how we can improve?
That's a great question. That is a very good question, because in counseling, we talk a lot about psychological engagement, and what does psychological engagement look like in an online space? And a lot of our teaching has now become, some of our teaching has become virtual. Here at Mercer, we are doing some face-to-face as well. But yeah, this is a great question. What we know from the counseling field is that, and we have been doing telemental health for a number of years now, so we do have some outcome studies that look at psychological engagement for online counseling. And in fact, especially for younger generations, there is no disruption in what we call the therapeutic alliance in online counseling versus as compared with face-to-face. So it is possible, definitely takes different techniques and a different approach, but it definitely is possible to still engage psychologically through the computer screen. And I think that's genuineness too, being genuine and kind of what we call flagging the minefield, or making sure that we understand where some of those pitfalls potentially are.
And I don't know if you are familiar with the work of Stephen and Sean Covey, The Habits of Highly Effective People, but one of his techniques for being a leader is to establish group norms. So we talk a lot about norms in counseling, especially in counseling groups, but I think it's also really applicable for business. So like when I teach a class, I have Zoom norms. We create norms together for what our Zoom norms are going to be. One of those norms for us is that everybody has to have their camera on. That's one way that you're able to see, you have more visual cues, at least being able to see somebody's face if they're like rambling on, or you can tell they're just actually texting on their phone the whole time. But creating those Zoom norms can be really helpful. Another one is everybody has to contribute at least once. You can't just sit there with your microphone off and just be a consumer. You need to contribute to the conversation. So I think establishing those norms within your group can be really helpful to pay more attention with where people are, or gauge where people are.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay. And we're ready to move on to the next slide as well. So this is my favorite part. I love talking about mindlessness, which is weird. But mindlessness, okay, instead of defining it, I'm going to describe mindlessness to you. So this may feel like a mini never have I ever game. But these are some moments of mindlessness that I've had. Have you ever driven to work and you pull into the parking lot and you have no idea how you got there? You don't remember stopping at the red lights. You don't remember taking a left. You like literally got in your car, drove to work, and you have no recollection of the last 20 minutes. That's mindlessness. Another one, and this one is funny, but it's true for me. I've gotten out of the shower and I can't remember if I actually bathed or if I just washed my hair. Like I've actually had to smell my arm to see if it smelled like body wash because I honestly cannot remember if I bathed. That's falling into mindlessness. And then another one, which I kind of like it when this happens, but it's when I'm eating lunch and I'm multitasking and I think I'm done with lunch, but then I look down and half my sandwich is still there. I didn't even know that I wasn't done eating. These are all examples of mindlessness. And this is what living in the past and living in the future does to us. We get so caught up being in this other place that we're mindless to what's going on in the present. So when we're thinking about what happened yesterday, or when we think about what we have to do as soon as we get to the office, we fall into these mindless behaviors. And living this way reduces the cognitive load, right? We don't have to think so much, but we're missing really important information. And if we're falling into mindlessness, we have to ask ourselves, are we really living, or are we just going through the motions of living? And that's, I don't know about you, but that's a terrible thought, to imagine that I'm just going through the motions of my life and not actually being present for my life. So, oh yeah, going into the triangle of awareness. I think that this is a really great graphic to really describe or to really demonstrate what we've been describing throughout. So with the triangle of awareness, this is a graphic that explains how our mindfulness or awareness is the interaction of physical sensations, emotions, and then thoughts, all in that order. So it has to start with our physical body, and then we recognize or acknowledge or accept the emotion, and then we make sense of it with our thoughts. So if you imagine a stressful situation, first you would feel it in your body. For me personally, I feel it like always in between my shoulder blades. So then I have emotions that go with that. Maybe my emotion is stress. Maybe my emotion is anxiety. Maybe my emotion, which is not really an emotion, but a fear of failure. I have to acknowledge what I'm feeling. And then the final step is that we notice our thoughts. When we notice those thoughts, we can separate them from being thoughts versus facts. Just because we think it doesn't make it true. So it's really important for us, if we're going to look at a diverse perspective and we're going to be mindful and we're going to consider multiple lenses, that our thoughts are not necessarily the absolute truth. So we have to step back from the way that our emotions and our bodily sensations and our thoughts are getting to our system one, our emotional decision making, and really framing it, taking a step back to slow it down, to look at our system two, logical, rational, diverse decision making. And so finally, we have a mindful disposition. So I've mentioned a couple of times that mindfulness is both a practice and it's a disposition. So mindful practices are things that we do. Those are behaviors. A mindful disposition is a way of being. It becomes more natural. So a disposition is our ability to monitor the physical, emotional, and mental state moment by moment. That sounds really complicated, but it is a learned trait, and we accomplish a disposition through practice. Just how, like, when we're young, I have a 4-year-old, and when he gets angry, boy, he flies off the handle. He's like yelling or kicking or throwing a tantrum. That's his disposition. Hopefully it will not always be his disposition, because that would be unfortunate for him. But by practicing patience, by learning coping skills, through, me talking to him about it and us practicing deep breathing, he will develop a disposition of patience, or, at least normal social behavior for adults. So just like that, mindfulness is also a disposition that can be cultivated through practice. And mindful practices look very different. So a lot of times when people think of mindfulness, they think of meditation or yoga or Tai Chi. And yes, these are absolutely forms of mindfulness, but these are not the only forms of mindfulness. So my personal favorite is hiking or being outside, or even just going for a nature walk. These are great forms of mindfulness. And they're things that you can practice at home, but maybe you can't practice in your office. Maybe you could go on a nature walk, but maybe not. So one way to practice mindfulness is in your morning cup of coffee, right? Everybody has a morning cup of coffee or a morning tea or something along those lines. And I think this example is so perfect for describing the physical, emotional, and like mental interaction. So when you drink that morning cup of coffee, first you smell it. God, I love the smell of coffee in the morning. And then as you drink it, it's warm, you feel it. For me, that brings a sense of joy. I feel happiness when I have my morning cup of coffee, and even more happiness after the third or fourth cup. But we start connecting that bodily sensation to our emotion. And I find joy in that moment. And then I'm using all of my senses to bring myself to the present. That may be the most calm I am all day. But there are other ways of little practices like that take a few minutes, that you can start cultivating mindful practices. One might be mindful eating. How often do we just shovel our food in? We're multitasking, we're eating with other people, we're doing other things. How often do we take the opportunity to really taste our food, to think about the flavors, the different flavors and the combination of flavors, to think about the texture, to think about what the taste is, to really slow down and enjoy that moment. Everybody, hopefully, has a lunch break. And that's a great opportunity for you to close your door, to eat alone, not every day, but sometimes, and just be mindful and in the moment and having that time for yourself. One of my favorite practices is mindfulness in the car. I was a school counselor for 6 years, and so on the way to work in the morning, I would drop my son off at daycare, and then I would turn off the radio, and I would drive to work. And during that 20-minute commute, the car would be completely silent, and I would sometimes reflect on the day that I wanted to have. I would say my intentions out loud. Sometimes I give myself a little pep talk. If you're spiritual or religious, you may take that time to pray, but that's the time for me every day. I started my day with 20 minutes just for me. Because once I get to school, I have 980 kids waiting on me. There is no more time for me. But mindfulness is a form of self-care, whatever that looks like for you. Just taking care of yourself and giving those intentional moments for yourself and prioritizing yourself, which is hard. And then finally, there's breathing exercises, and we could do a 1-hour webinar just on breathing exercises because there are so many, and there are so many apps and things like that that can train you and teach you to use those practices. On our next slide, we actually have several resources here for you that you can download. They're on the go, and you don't have to be fully versed in mindfulness or go to a class to learn about mindfulness. You can just jump in by utilizing some of these resources, or just by taking time for yourself to be mindful in those moments every day.
So here is our contact information if you have any additional questions. We also will be here on the webcast to answer any questions that you have right now.
I'll throw out one question I'm sure a lot of people are dealing with. How do you, or what are some tips or tools you would suggest when someone managing anxiety while they're working? A lot of us are working, and if they're working in person, it's stressful. If you're working at home, it's stressful. You may be feeling tension in your shoulders and you're clenching your jaw. What are some tools or some tips you could give to help someone manage that?
Well, some of these phone apps that we just mentioned have built-in calendars where every 30 minutes or every hour it reminds you to get up and stretch. And something as simple as that, you're sitting at your computer, you're looking at the screen, it's exhausting on your eyes, it's exhausting your brain, and you just get so focused on that moment. Just a reminder to, okay, get up and go for a walk. Just down the hall, maybe just go down the hall to the drinking fountain, then come back. But intentionally putting in these moments to just relax your body, focus on your physical body. Where do you feel the stress right now? Where do you feel the tension in your body? Using other ways, like Jordon mentioned, to bring in that sensory experience. Maybe it's through food. With our school counseling students, we have them do one particular mindfulness exercise where they take a raisin and they just eat that raisin. They leave the raisin on their tongue. They feel what it feels like, just to bring them back into this physical space. And when you feel anxious, being able to hold on to something concrete and tangible can be centering. And you don't have a lot of time, so you don't have a full hour that you can go meditate, but you do have perhaps 30 seconds where you can just bring yourself back into the moment.
Yes, Morgan, that grounding is so important, like having something to ground yourself when you're feeling anxious. And in addition to doing grounding things that are physical, I sometimes like to combat emotion with emotion, right? So anxiety is a feeling. And so sometimes it's helpful to counter that negative, or I wouldn't say negative, it's actually just uncomfortable. Counter that uncomfortable feeling with a more comfortable feeling. So one mindfulness exercise is called gratitude journaling. And so I do this sometimes when I'm feeling extremely stressed or extremely overwhelmed. I just did my comprehensive exam, so I felt like that for 7 straight days. I would write down something that I was thankful for in that moment. I'm thankful that my husband is taking care of my son so that I can sit down here and write. I'm thankful that I have this amazing view so that when I get up, I have something beautiful to look at. Like there are deer in my backyard. Like that, there are little things to be grateful for, even when you're at work. and so that you can counterbalance those uncomfortable emotions with happy or joyful or more comfortable emotions.
And do either of you have some suggested reading, any books or articles or anything that you would suggest if someone wanted to get some more tools, tips, or just dig deeper into this topic that you would suggest them reading?
Jon Kabat-Zinn is a major researcher and popular nonfiction as well for mindfulness. UCLA has a mindfulness center, and they have a lot of free apps on their website. If you go to the UCLA Mindfulness Awareness Research Center, they're all online. They have the app as well that you can use. So those are two places that I would recommend people going to get more resources.
All right, a couple more questions. It says, is there a particular reason a person falls into deep mindfulness, finds themselves constantly forgetting certain things? I find myself often not in the moment.
This person said that they do practice mindfulness, but yet are still having a hard time being present in the moment. Is that the question?
Yeah, they fall into deep mindfulness and find themselves consistently forgetting certain things, find themselves not often in the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that sounds like somebody who has a lot of things on their mind and a lot of things that are competing for space in their brain. And when that's your life, when you hear me saying, well, just take a few more minutes to practice mindfulness, that can feel overwhelming. Like I don't need more things to do in my day. And so that's what we're talking about, and the difference between mindfulness things to do versus a mindfulness disposition. And mindfulness is not just a series of things that you do during the day, but it's also a mindset that you bring, and just a slowing down of the decision-making process, and recognizing that there is never enough time to get everything done during the day that you need to do, but it will be okay in the end. And we take each moment for what it is, and we recognize that sometimes we feel really good about it. Sometimes we don't feel so good about it, but we can still own that and be okay with it and move on.
And another question, how do you incorporate mindfulness and your spirituality? How do you, what's the intersection between your spiritual religious relationship with God and mindfulness?
It's a great
question.
Do
you have to, and how does that work together?
Jordan, do you want to talk about that at all?
I don't know if there is like a definitive answer, or if that is more of just a personal practice that you cultivate. I can totally tell you how I do it, but I also think that that by practicing mindfulness and by practicing your religious rituals, you will eventually figure out how to marry the two in a way that's, conducive to you. But for me, one thing that I do, like when I go for a run, I will sometimes not take music with me, or if I do take music, I listen to like religious music or spiritual music. And so on that run, maybe it's only 20 minutes, but during that time, sometimes I talk to God. During that time, sometimes I've done, this sounds kind of weird, but this is something that I do. I would go for a run and think about the things that I'm grateful for, think about the things that I'm happy about, and I would almost like gratitude journal, but out loud during a run. So thank you for the ability to be able to run. Thank you for the ability to have this strong body. Thank you for the ability to run today, to have the weather today, because that is grounding and it's centering, and I'm being in the moment, but I'm also practicing, my spiritual beliefs by talking to God about that. So it's almost like gratitude journaling out loud through prayer.
There is quite a bit of overlap for a lot of people. And in fact, a lot of the research that we have on the effectiveness of mindfulness comes from EEG and fMRI studies of Tibetan monks who have a mindfulness practice. So yes, there's a lot of overlap. A lot of the research also comes from studying athletes And you think, well, what does that have to do with mindfulness? Well, this idea of kind of optimal performance and getting into the zone is being present in the moment, despite a lot of pressure, despite a lot of potential for anxiety, and being able to focus in on the task that you have at the moment, and being focused and present. So yes, a lot of overlap for people in terms of their mindfulness practice and spirituality.
We got one more question. It says, can you multitask and be mindful, like listen to a podcast and drive? Is the practice of mindfulness meaning you do one thing at a time?
That's a great question. Is mindfulness doing one thing at a time? If I could always do one thing at a time during my day, I think I wouldn't be probably as productive, but it would be a lot less stressful. I don't know that that's realistic for most people in their everyday lives. I think mindfulness is more about taking those moments when you can and recentering yourself, and recognizing that you still have to go back into the chaos and the ambiguity. So it's not about entirely reducing the ambiguity in our lives and the multitasking. It's more about understanding it and accepting it, and recognizing that our lives are chaotic, and they will be, and I can move through the chaos and still be okay at the end of it. So no, I think you can still multitask and still have a mindfulness disposition.
Yeah, I think it's all about a practice that, like Morgan said, is recentering for you. So if you can listen to a podcast and you feel recentered, you've been able to slow down and take a breath and, be with yourself, then yes.
But also be safe if you're driving.
Yeah, don't close your eyes.
Well, you two have received a lot of compliments in this Q&A about how thorough this has been. You made mindfulness seem straightforward and less complex. Thank you both very much.